Have you ever felt your peace stolen by just one sentence? Not because it was true, but because it reached you, pierced that quiet place inside where you thought nothing could touch you. You weren't hurt by facts. You were unsettled by how easily you were pulled off balance. That's how power works today. Not through violence, but through provocation. Not through fists, but through attention. Welcome to the real battlefield, where silence is feared more than argument, and where being calm is more radical than being right. They don't need to defeat you. They just need you to flinch, to overreact, to abandon yourself in the name of proving something. Because once they control your reaction, they control the story. But what if you didn't react? What if your stillness, your refusal to explain or justify, became the most disarming response of all? That's what the Stoics mastered. In a world desperate for your attention, restraint becomes rebellion. Dignity becomes strategy, and silence becomes a form of dominance, not defeat. You were never meant to fight every opinion. You were meant to govern yourself so fully that no opinion can reach the throne of your mind. So today, we won't teach you how to argue better. We'll show you how to stop needing to argue at all. Stay with me. This might just change the way you win. 1. They never taught you how to hold your ground. They taught you how to behave, how to be liked, how to sit still and smile politely while the world spoke over you. But they never taught you how to stand your ground when silence is mistaken for agreement. Since childhood, you were praised for being easy, called mature when you swallowed your anger, applauded for being pleasant even when something inside you was breaking. And so, you learned the quiet art of disappearing. No one warned you of the cost. That every time you chose to remain agreeable instead of truthful, you buried yourself a little deeper. That every nod, every forced smile, every swallowed word trained your soul to retreat instead of rise. You were never taught how to defend yourself with dignity, only how to feel without exploding. But feeling is not enough, and silence when misused is not peace, it's erasure. What they didn't teach you is this. Every time you react from pure emotion, you hand over the reins of your life. Not just your words, but your presence, your image, your direction. Emotions, though real, are like currency. In the wrong hands, they can be traded against you. And those who seek to manipulate, they know this. They don't need to raise their voice. They only need to press lightly, make one well-placed comment, and wait for you to flinch. Because the moment you reveal where you're sensitive, they know exactly where to press next. Picture this. You're in a meeting. A colleague drops a half-smile, half-joke that slices into your confidence. "Well, I guess that's one way to do it," they say, loud enough for everyone to hear. You feel the heat rise in your chest. Your instinct tells you to fire back, to assert yourself, to defend your competence. And you could. You might even win that exchange. But in doing so, you've just let them set the terms of the game. You've stepped into their arena, on their timeline, in their frame, and that is not mastery. That is surrender. A warrior doesn't charge blindly onto the battlefield. He studies the terrain. He watches, waits, controls his breath, his footing, his mind, because the first soldier to panic is the first one to fall. Most people walk through life like that soldier, emotional, reactive, always trying to prove, to explain, to justify, firing their energy in every direction, hoping someone will see their pain and validate their worth. You may think you're strong because you never let things slide, because you speak up, defend yourself, clap back. But if your strength comes only from reaction, then it's not strength. It's exposure. It means your emotions sit too close to the surface, and anyone who learns where to poke can own your day. Or worse, your identity. Real strength, the kind the Stoics revered, is not about loudness. It's about stillness. It's about standing unmoved in a storm of opinion, being provoked and yet not giving your power away. Because once you become predictable, once they know exactly what string to pull to make you jump, then you are no longer free. You are managed. You are controlled. Now imagine the opposite. Imagine being unreadable, unshakable. Someone makes a dig at you in public, and you blink once, then go back to your calm. You don't fidget, you don't respond, you don't give them what they came for, and suddenly the balance of power shifts, because now they're wondering what you're thinking, what you'll do, whether you'll respond later, whether you saw through them completely. Your calmness becomes terrifying because it reflects something they can't measure or manipulate, an inner discipline they've never cultivated. In a world that's addicted to reaction, stillness becomes power. The person who doesn't rise to bait, who doesn't shout, who doesn't flinch, that person is dangerous. Not because they are aggressive, but because they are sovereign. Their emotions are governed by reason. Their actions are chosen, not provoked. That's what Stoicism teaches us. Not how to be numb, but how to be disciplined, how to rule ourselves before trying to influence the world. Because the first and greatest battlefield is the space between stimulus and response. And if you can own that space, if you can pause when everyone else is triggered, you don't just change the moment, you change the rules of the game. So, the next time you feel provoked, remember, you don't have to fight to win, you only have to refuse to be moved. And that silence, that refusal, that calm, not only protects your dignity, it reclaims your command. And in the next part, we'll explore how to wield that silence, not as a retreat, but as a strategy that rewrites the entire dynamic. 2. The pause that shifts the power. You've been told silence is weak, that if you don't speak up immediately, you'll be misunderstood, overlooked, or dismissed. But what if that silence is exactly what gives you power? What if, instead of being empty, it was deliberate? Stoicism doesn't view silence as absence, it sees it as presence without chaos. In a world that trembles for attention, silence becomes a mirror. And most people are terrified of mirrors. They're not afraid of your anger. Anger is predictable. It's noisy, explosive, and easy to label. But silence? Silence unsettles. It creates space. It introduces doubt. It holds a room longer than any argument ever could. Because when you go quiet, you take your energy back. You stop feeding the fire, and suddenly they're left with nothing but their own reflection, no reaction to cling to, no noise to cover their intentions. That's the battlefield they never trained for. Not one of punches, but of poise. Not one of shouting, but of holding. The most powerful response is often the one never delivered, because it means you didn't need it. You didn't need to win the moment. You already owned it. You may think you're proving strength by reacting quickly, by setting the record straight, by not letting anything slide. But listen closely to what Machiavelli would say, and yes, the Stoics would agree. A man who cannot govern himself has no business trying to lead others. And governance doesn't begin in politics or power. It begins in the smallest, quietest moments. It begins in the 2 seconds before your mouth opens, the 1 second before your face tightens, the half second before your chest tightens and your heart rushes to defend your pride. That space is where strength is built. In that space, you get to choose whether to be drawn into the game or rise above it. And the more you practice that pause, the more impenetrable you become. The Stoics called this inner citadel, the part of you no one can touch unless you open the gates. Ask yourself honestly, How many times have you handed over your dignity just to be acknowledged for a fleeting moment? How often have you responded not from wisdom, but from the wound? Every slight, every jab, every sideways compliment is not an attack, it's a test. Not of your status, not of your education, but of your axis. The part of you that stays grounded when the world tries to tilt you. And until you learn to remain on that axis, nothing external will secure you. Not the title you carry, not the knowledge you've accumulated, not the victories behind you. Because if your peace still depends on how others behave, you're not free. You're exposed. Some people will never punch you. They don't need to. They operate with subtler weapons, sarcasm masked as humor, questions that question your worth, praise with a blade hidden behind it. Their words won't knock you down. They'll invite you to lower yourself. When that happens, don't compete for dominance. Don't match their tone. Don't prove anything. Just breathe. Just pause. Let that silence stand between you and the trap they've laid. Because when you refuse to engage on their terms, you flip the balance of power. You show that your responses are governed, not by them, but by your values. And that makes you unreadable, unshakable. The reactive man is led. But the man who pauses, who observes, who chooses, he leads. He governs. He rules, not over others, but over himself. And from that place, real influence begins. So if you've ever walked away from a conversation feeling like you lost a piece of yourself, remember this. Strength isn't in having the last word. It's in knowing when your silence says more than their sentence ever could. And if you're still with me, then maybe you've felt that shift, that recognition that there is something deeper in you waiting to be honored. Stay with that. In the next part, we'll go further, not in avoiding conflict, but in mastering presence so completely that you no longer need defense. 3. When stillness becomes strength. They told you that strength is loud, that the one who speaks first, who speaks the fastest, who dominates the room with noise, wins. They told you that attention equals power, that the one who fills the space commands it. But that's not strength. That's performance. That's noise dressed up to look like dominance. True strength doesn't announce itself. It doesn't chase applause. It doesn't scramble to be understood. It doesn't need to. Real power chooses stillness, not as surrender, but as control. Because stillness reveals. It unsettles. It doesn't compete for space. It becomes the space. And most people can't sit with that. Look around. Everyone wants to speak. No one wants to be still. Why? Because silence echoes. And in that echo, your own thoughts return to you. That's where truth lives, not in the noise you make, but in the silence you're willing to hold. The Stoics understood this well. They taught that mastery is not in conquering others, but in ruling yourself. The louder you are, the more you expose. The quicker you react, the easier you are to read. And what can be read can be used. Predictable people become tools, useful but never feared, never respected. Now think about this. The generals who win wars don't shout from the battlefield. They stand on the hilltop, watching, calculating, seeing what no one else sees. Because when everyone else is reacting, the one who pauses commands. When the crowd speaks over each other, the one who listens holds the highest ground. You've seen this before. In courtrooms, in negotiations, even in family disputes. The ones who remain calm shift the entire outcome. Not because they overpowered, but because their restraint created pressure. Their silence forced others to reveal more than they intended. That's leverage. That's real control. Stillness makes people nervous. It invites tension. And tension, when held correctly, makes others show their hand, because when you're silent, they start over-explaining. They start guessing what you think. They start justifying themselves even before you speak. That's when you know you've already won. You didn't force it. You let the silence do the work. But don't make the mistake of thinking that silence means passivity, or that calm means softness. No. Silence is a weapon, sharper than anger, cleaner than vengeance. It's a blade. And the Stoics would say it's the tool of someone who governs himself so completely he doesn't need to announce his edge. He simply holds it. Machiavelli, though not a Stoic, understood a truth that complements it. He wrote that a ruler must know when to appear kind and when to appear cruel, not to be, but to appear. Because perception governs the world. Control perception, and you don't need to control much else. So let them call you distant. Let them call you unreadable. Let them say you're hard to get close to. That's the point. People fear what they can't define. They attack what they can't move. And when they say you're too cold, too quiet, too reserved, what they're really saying is, I can't control this one. You are not here to be easily understood. You are not here to comfort their expectations. You are here to be solid, steady, unshakable. Let the loud ones fight for the spotlight. Let them burn themselves out, needing to be heard. But you stay still. You say less. You make every word count. And when you walk into a room, you won't need to raise your voice. Your presence will already say everything. If you've ever felt this truth in your bones, type "still power" in the comments below. Because in the next part, we'll go deeper. We'll explore how to sharpen your presence so much that even in silence, your energy shapes the room. For real control begins. Within control has never been about ruling over others. It's about ruling over yourself. In every confrontation, the true struggle is not external, it's within. And whoever wins that inner conflict wins everything else. You may believe you're being tested by the people around you, but you're not. You're being tested by your own undisciplined impulses, the part of you that still wants to interrupt, still wants to be right, still wants to feel significant. That's the true opponent. And that's where most fall, not for lack of strength, but for lack of mastery. Because they mistake volume for authority. They confuse speed with clarity. They believe that the first to speak wins. But the Stoics knew better. Every insult is bait. Every jab is a setup designed to pull you off balance, to make you step outside yourself and act from ego instead of essence. And the question is never, are you strong enough to fire back? The real question is, are you composed enough to remain still? Picture it. You're in a room. Someone throws shade. Maybe they mock you in front of others or question your ability with a smirk. All eyes turn to you. They're waiting for a reaction, but you don't move. You look, not with anger, not with fear, but with the clarity of someone who refuses to be pulled off center. That stillness becomes the loudest force in the room. Not because you silenced them, but because you didn't need to say a word. That's not suppression, that's self-command. And here's the thing, people who lack inner control will always try to control others. They poke at your calm, not because they're brave, but because they're hoping to break something in you that mirrors what they've lost in themselves. But you owe no one your energy. Your presence is earned. Your silence is sacred. And your attention is not charity, it's strategy. Silence, when held with awareness, becomes a mirror. And when you hold it up, people see what they've been trying to hide. They panic because they came for a fight. They came to feel powerful by making you flinch, but you didn't. And now they don't know who you are anymore. And in that not knowing, they lose control. This shows up everywhere, not just in arguments, but in meetings, at family dinners, in long-term relationships. There will always be someone trying to provoke you, not because they hate you, but because they rely on your reaction to feel significant. But when you refuse to play, the entire script flips. Suddenly, they're not the ones directing the moment, you are. That's what calm does. It doesn't just win the battle. It changes the terrain. It says, you don't determine my timing. I move when I choose. That one breath, that refusal to blink, it changes everything. Because now the room starts to revolve around you. You become the anchor, the reference point, the one others adjust to. True power is standing in the middle of chaos without twitching, watching someone try to provoke you and simply choosing not to engage. That decision, just that pause, is where power is reborn. You stop chasing approval. You stop fearing judgment. You stop needing to prove yourself. And from that place, you rise, not with rage, but with presence. Not through performance, but through stillness. Here's the truth. What the world calls ego is often just noise. It doesn't fear being wrong, it fears being unseen. That's why silence unsettles people. It isn't just quiet, it's the death of ego's voice. You've seen this before. Maybe someone attacked you in public or online. They didn't want truth. They wanted your spark. They wanted to see if you'd burn. But when you didn't, when you simply stayed present and still, they unraveled. Because the chaos they hoped to feed on was never served. When you no longer feed someone's need for escalation, they fall back into themselves. Their insecurities turn inward. Their need to dominate dissolves into confusion. And you stay above the fight, not detached in cruelty, but detached in wisdom. You start moving differently. You speak only when it matters. You love with boundaries. You give without leaking. You don't detach because you don't care. You detach because you do, but you've learned the cost of offering your peace to those who only want your reaction. That's not disconnection. That's evolution. You stop folding. You stop bleeding. You stop over-explaining. You just breathe. You just see clearly. And you act only when it serves, not your pride, but your purpose. That's not ego. That's clarity. That's composure. That's Stoic power. 5. Calm costs you the crowd, but gives you yourself. Being calm sounds admirable until you feel what it costs. Because the moment you stop reacting, you don't just gain peace, you start losing people. And not because you've done something wrong, but because you stopped doing what made you easy to influence. You stopped explaining yourself. You stopped justifying every decision. You stopped leaking energy into conversations designed to drain you. And suddenly, you became the problem. They say you've changed, that you've become distant, cold, unreachable. But the truth is, you didn't change. You just stopped abandoning yourself to keep others comfortable. You stopped performing emotion to keep the peace. You stopped letting your presence be controlled by their instability. And that shift, that calm, that grounded presence unsettled them. Because they never wanted connection. They wanted control. And they used disorder, confusion, and emotional chaos to get it. So when you stopped playing their game, when you no longer panicked on cue, no longer rushed to explain, no longer collapsed to make room for their drama, you broke the rhythm. And when the rhythm breaks, the ones who depended on it to feel powerful crumble. Your reaction was the scaffolding for their self-importance, and now, without it, they're exposed. This is the price of inner stillness, the quiet exits, the sudden distance, the way people drift when you no longer orbit around them. They don't leave because you are harsh. They leave because they no longer know how to move you. You became unreadable, and what can't be read can't be controlled. But don't confuse their departure with your failure. It's not a punishment. It's a filter. It separates those who were drawn to your imbalance from those who respected your clarity. And yes, it will sting. You'll feel it. The questions, the silence, the urge to soften your boundaries so you can feel accepted again. But as Machiavelli once warned, he who builds his house on the applause of others builds it on sand. So let the waves come, let the noise rise, let the exits happen. You were never meant to be palatable. You were meant to be solid, unshakable, and that doesn't require mass approval. It requires self-respect, the kind you feel when you're alone, with no one to impress, and you're still proud of how you carried yourself. That's real peace. And in this world, it's rare. Most people don't live with that kind of stillness. They live on attention. They feed on reaction. They need the argument, the back and forth, the reassurance that they matter through your constant responses. But you don't. Not anymore. Because your calm isn't passivity. It's resistance. It's strength under control. It's the quiet that shakes the room. You no longer flinch when provoked. You no longer hand your presence to those who haven't earned it. And yes, that makes you a threat, but only to those who relied on your weakness to feel powerful. So when they say, "You've changed," let them. Smile. They're right. You did change. You stopped playing the game. And now, you're not one of the pieces. You're designing the board. Let's clear up a dangerous lie. The idea that calm equals coldness, that if you detach, you stop caring, that if you don't respond, you've lost your humanity. But that's not detachment, that's disconnection. There's a difference. Detachment is born from understanding, from seeing clearly, from knowing that your peace is too valuable to waste on battles meant to distract, not build. You're not less human for choosing peace. You're more, because you feel deeply and yet refuse to be owned by those feelings. You care, but you don't collapse. You listen, but you don't leak. And in doing so, you walk the path the Stoics walked, not by avoiding emotion, but by mastering it. If you've ever felt this shift, comment "Clarity wins" below. And if you're walking this quieter, stronger path, subscribe now, because in the next part we'll explore how detachment, when rooted in virtue, becomes the gateway to true influence. 6. Detachment is strength in disguise. True detachment isn't about feeling less, it's about not letting feeling rule you. It's the discipline to stand in the fire of emotion, anger, love, grief, without letting it consume your reason. You still care, you still love, but you no longer abandon yourself in the process. You no longer cross your own boundaries just to avoid discomfort or to keep the peace. You've stopped chasing those who treat your worth like it's negotiable, as if your value lowers the moment you stop performing for their comfort. This is where inner strength is forged, not in how loudly you speak when provoked, but in how quietly you remain grounded, not in how quickly you respond, but in how deeply you breathe before you decide what deserves your voice. In detachment, you don't become less human, you become fully human, fully awake, fully anchored, no longer swayed by every emotion, no longer ruled by past wounds. No longer stuck in the same cycles where you gave more than you had just to be seen. Some will look at you now and call you distant. Some will say you've become too calm, too measured, too rational. But what they really mean is they can no longer manipulate your reactions. They no longer know how to push you out of yourself. The levers they use to pull no longer work, because now you observe before you respond. You weigh your energy. You choose your battles. You understand that not every emotion is an instruction, and not every invitation to react is one you need to accept. You've learned that silence can say more than words ever could, that peace isn't something you beg for, it's something you guard, that your presence doesn't have to prove anything, it just has to remain true. You don't explain your detachment, you embody it. You don't debate your limits, you protect them. You don't fear connection, but you no longer lose yourself inside of it. And when people can't meet you at that level, you let them go, not with bitterness, but with clarity. You no longer bond through shared wounds. You bond through shared vision, through reciprocity, through alignment. And if that's missing, you walk, not to punish, but to preserve. Because you've outgrown the need to be everything for everyone. Now, you focus on being whole for yourself. That's not cold, that's clarity. That's not detachment from care, that's detachment from chaos. The kind of stillness Machiavelli would call power, not cruel, not numb, but sharp, intentional, measured. Because when you know your value, you stop trying to prove it. You stop chasing what runs. You stop justifying what should already be evident. You stop begging to be understood. You simply remain calm, grounded, unshaken. In a world that thrives on reactions, that kind of presence is a disruption. It challenges the very structure people rely on to control others. You don't move when poked. You don't shatter when misunderstood. You don't leak your energy just to be heard. And that's radical. Let them say what they will. Let them call it cold. Let them misinterpret the silence. Because you know what it really is. It's command. It's sovereignty. It's the moment you stopped bleeding for others and started building for yourself. And that is the ground from which we move into what comes next. Not just calmness, but influence. Influence without force, presence without noise, leadership without needing to lead. 7. Calm is the sharpest weapon. Look around. The loud ones are everywhere. The ones who interrupt, who fight for the last word, who seek the spotlight like it's oxygen. They win applause. They win attention. Sometimes they even win the argument. But then what? They burn out. They implode. Because their sense of power was borrowed, not built. It was dependent on being seen, and power that depends on visibility is power that doesn't last. Now look at the calm ones. They don't talk much. They don't chase attention. But when they walk into a room, everything shifts. People lower their voices. They listen closer. They straighten up. Not out of fear, but out of something far more lasting. Respect. Because calm carries weight. Calm signals command. Not just over voice, but over thought, over emotion, over action. The calm one doesn't react. They observe. They wait. They choose. And because of that, they don't just survive, they endure. While others waste energy trying to dominate the moment, the calm ones build something lasting. While others defend themselves against every perceived attack, the calm ones redirect that energy into vision. Calm is not weakness, it's precision. It doesn't move often, but when it doesn't miss. Machiavelli once said, "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both." But the calm one doesn't need to choose. They command both without ever asking, because their presence speaks before their mouth does. Their restraint cuts deeper than any outburst. They don't explain, they embody, and that's what makes them unshakable. While others burn bridges to prove a point, the calm one walks across those same bridges when no one's watching. While others scream, they listen. While others rush to respond, they plan. So when the storm hits, they're already 5 steps ahead, not by accident, but by design. Calm is strategy. Calm is rebellion. In a world addicted to noise, to speed, to constant stimulation, calm is a revolt against chaos. It doesn't compete, it outlasts. It's not just a pause, it's a posture, a way of being. And that posture becomes legacy. Every second, something pulls at your focus. Notifications, glances, words, tone, distractions dressed as urgency. The world wants you to react, because reactivity is profitable. But in the middle of that noise, the one who stays still becomes invisible to the game and dangerous to the system. They can't provoke you, they can't predict you, they can't use you, because you're no longer reactive, you're sovereign. Stillness is not absence, it's absolute presence. It's the art of remaining aligned while everything else spins. It's the ability to let others unravel while you remain centered. It doesn't mean you don't care, it means you know what your energy is worth, and you don't give it away for free. People try to press your buttons, not because they care what you think, but because they want to see if you'll break, if you'll play. But when you don't, when you just remain, a strange silence falls, because now their tactics don't work. Your stillness becomes a mirror. In it, they see their chaos, their desperation, their need to be obeyed, to be right, to be seen. And you become untouchable. Not because you've walled yourself off, but because you've gone too deep to be dragged. You don't perform, you don't justify, you don't chase, you choose. You respond when it's time, you act when it matters, and when you speak, it's not noise, it's a knife through fog, because it comes from calm, from clarity, from conviction. Machiavelli never said to be loud, he said to be effective, and in this world, the most effective move is often the quiet one, the one no one saw coming. So let them shout, let them demand, let them burn their energy, proving a point. You don't need to be in the storm. You are the eye, the center, the unmoving point that everything else orbits. Most people spend their lives chasing something, recognition, validation, a victory. But when you master calm, you stop chasing, because you realize you are the victory. Not because you defeated anyone, but because you no longer need to. You are your own confirmation. You are your own anchor. You move not to be noticed, but because it is time. Reactive people demand respect. Calm people command it without a word, without force, just presence. Because calm is not silence. It is stature, the choice to prioritize alignment over applause, depth over dominance, peace over noise. And when someone tries to pull you into their storm, you don't fight. You don't flee, you don't explain, you just remain. You look them in the eye and say, without saying a word, I see your chaos, and I refuse to become it. That is calm, that is control, that is power. And it's not given, it's built, quietly, daily, internally, until you stop playing the game and start shaping it. Now listen closely. This part isn't for the crowd. It's for the few who stayed, the few who felt something shift, not outside, but deep within. If you're still here, you've already begun. A quieter strength is waking up inside you, one that no longer chases attention, no longer explains, no longer reacts just to be heard. You're not here to play their games. You're here to govern yourself. Not through force, but through presence, not through noise, but through alignment. They may try to pull you back with guilt or drama, but you won't move, not out of pride, but out of clarity, because you've seen what happens when you give your power away, and now you won't. So walk forward, not to be seen, but to see clearly. Don't react, don't explain, just remain. Because the one who commands themselves needs no throne, and the one who stays calm in chaos already rules in silence. Type still power if this spoke to you. And if you're ready to keep walking this path, you know what to do. The next storm awaits.